1942, local time, South China Sea. The helicopter flew low, too low to be seen on most civilian radars, skimming just above the dark water as its rotors carved the humid night air. Below, the sea was calm. Ahead, the horizon glowed faintly, not from the sun, but from navigation lights of warships operating far from shore. This was not a combat mission, it was surveillance, and in the South China Sea, surveillance is often where things begin to go wrong. The mission, the US Navy helicopter, operating from a nearby surface combatant, was conducting a routine maritime patrol. Its sensors were active, scanning the surface for unusual movement, tracking vessels transiting through contested waters. No weapons armed, no aggressive maneuvers, just eyes and ears. The crew had done this dozens of times before, but tonight felt different. First visual contact, 1945 hours. The sensor operator leaned closer to the screen. Contact ahead, surface combatant, Chinese. The image resolved into a PLA Navy warship. Gray hull, angular superstructure, radar arrays rotating steadily. It was operating with running lights on, a sign of confidence or indifference. The helicopter adjusted course slightly, maintaining a safe offset. Professional distance. Unverified. Tension background. Unverified OSINT assessments later suggested the area had seen increased Chinese naval patrols following recent multinational exercises. Analysts believe regional commanders on both sides were operating under heightened alert conditions. If true, that meant nerves were already tight. The first warning, 1947 hours. The helicopter transmitted a standard advisory. Chinese naval vessel, US Navy aircraft operating lawfully in international airspace, maintaining safe distance. No reply. Not unusual. Silence is common in these encounters, but silence doesn't mean inaction. The light 1948 hours. A sudden greenish flash washed across the cockpit. The pilot flinched. The sensor operator shouted, "Laser, we're being lased." The beam wasn't continuous. It pulsed, sweeping briefly across the helicopter's nose before disappearing. Then it came back, stronger. Why lasers matter? Military-grade lasers aren't toys. They're designed to blind sensors, disrupt targeting systems, and in some cases temporarily impair vision. Even low-power dazzlers are treated seriously, because shining a laser at an aircraft is not harassment, it's a hostile act. Unverified, laser type. Unverified reporting later suggested the beam's wavelength was consistent with ship-mounted laser dazzlers used for warning and deterrence. However, the intensity and repeated targeting raised concerns that it exceeded standard signaling use. No official confirmation was ever released, but the helicopter crew knew what they felt. The cockpit reacts. 1949 hours. Warning tones sounded as sensors detected interference. The pilot banked slightly, increasing distance. Chinese warship, you are illuminating a US military aircraft with a laser. Cease immediately. The transmission was calm, controlled, but inside the cockpit, adrenaline spiked. The second illumination. The laser returned. This time it tracked the helicopter's movement, not randomly, but deliberately, across the fuselage, across the sensor turret, across the cockpit canopy. The sensor operator cursed under his breath. "They're painting us." The red line. In military aviation, certain actions cross thresholds. Missile locks, radar illumination, and laser targeting of aircraft. This was one of them. The helicopter crew knew it, and somewhere beyond the horizon, so did American commanders. Unverified, sensor effects. Unverified logs later suggested brief degradation in the helicopter's electro-optical feed during the illumination, consistent with laser interference. No permanent damage was reported, but even temporary disruption changes rules. The pullback 1951 hours. The helicopter broke off, climbing and widening distance while maintaining visual contact. No flares, no aggressive turns, just separation. But the incident had already escalated, because the moment the laser struck the aircraft, it stopped being a local encounter. The message goes out. Back aboard the US warship, the call came in. Air Asset reports laser illumination from Chinese surface combatant. The Combat Information Center went silent, then active. Every sensor turned toward the Chinese ship. Every second of data began recording. This was no longer just about a helicopter. Why this is dangerous? Lasers are the perfect gray zone weapon. They don't explode. They don't leave debris. They're easy to deny, but they send a clear message. We can reach you. We can disrupt you, and we're willing to try. Unverified, command discussion. Unverified sources later claimed intense discussions unfolded almost immediately, not about retaliation, but about response options. Ignore it and normalize the behavior, protest diplomatically, and appear passive, or respond decisively without firing a shot. The decision window was narrow. The Chinese ship holds course. 1954 hours. The PLA Navy warship did not maneuver, did not signal apology, did not acknowledge the warning. It continued on course, radars rotating calmly as if nothing had happened. That silence spoke volumes. The stage is set. The helicopter returned safely. The laser incident was logged, time-stamped, categorized, and transmitted upward. What happened next would not be immediate, but it would be deliberate, because while lasers leave no craters, they leave memories, and the response being prepared would ensure this one wasn't forgotten. South China Sea, hours after the laser incident. The helicopter was gone. The laser had stopped, but the encounter was far from over. In modern naval warfare, the most dangerous moments often come after the trigger is released, when decisions ripple outward through command chains, alliances, and doctrines written precisely to prevent war, but tested by actions that flirt with it. This was one of those moments. The data freeze. Back aboard the US warship, every second of the encounter was preserved. Sensor feeds, cockpit audio, laser wavelength signatures, radar emissions from the Chinese vessel. Nothing was deleted, nothing was edited, because in gray zone confrontations, data is ammunition, and this incident had produced plenty. Unverified. Initial assessment. According to Unverified OSINT-linked reporting, analysts concluded within minutes that the laser illumination was not accidental and not a safety signal. The beam tracked the aircraft's movement, re-engaged after warnings, focused on sensor housings and cockpit canopy. These details mattered. They suggested intent. Why intent changes everything. If the laser had been momentary, it could be dismissed. If it had been unfocused, it could be denied. If it had been weak, it could be shrugged off. But deliberate illumination crosses a doctrinal boundary. It signals willingness to interfere with military aviation, an act that, if repeated or escalated, could cause injury, loss of control, or crash. That's not harassment, that's risk creation. The call up the chain. Within the hour, the incident reached higher command levels, not through headlines, not through press releases, through secure channels that carried one simple message. A US military aircraft was deliberately illuminated by a Chinese warship using a laser. No adjectives, no emotion, just facts. The question commanders faced: how do you respond to a provocation that causes no physical damage, leaves no visible evidence, can be denied publicly, yet establishes a dangerous precedent? The answer was not to match the action, it was to overmatch the message. The response begins quietly. There were no warnings issued to the Chinese ship, no immediate maneuvering toward it, no radio threats. Instead, the US Navy did something far more unsettling. It changed the environment. Airspace fills. Several hours after the incident, aircraft began appearing on regional sensors. Not all at once, not aggressively, but steadily. Maritime patrol aircraft flying wider orbits, unmanned aerial systems increasing persistence, carrier-based fighters launching routine training sorties. Nothing extraordinary on paper, everything deliberate in practice. Unverified force posture shift. Unverified regional tracking later suggested a temporary elevation in US ISR density around the Chinese warship's operating area. No announcements accompanied it, but from the perspective of the PLA Navy ship, they were no longer alone. The sea changes too. Below the surface, activity increased. Not loud, not obvious, but detectable. Surface combatants adjusted spacing. Sonar patterns subtly shifted. Data links stayed hot. No one was hunting, but everyone was watching. The Chinese warship realizes it. From the bridge of the Chinese vessel, the picture was changing. More radar returns, more aircraft overhead, more attention, yet no confrontation, no threats, no reaction that could be framed as escalation, just presence, and presence is pressure. Why this is unleashing hell without firing a shot. The phrase doesn't mean violence, it means dominance. The US response was designed to say, you fired a laser at one helicopter. Now you will operate under constant observation. Every move recorded, every signal logged. That's not punishment, that's deterrence. Unverified electronic environment. Some unverified reports suggested the electromagnetic kinetic environment around the Chinese ship became unusually crowded in the hours following the incident. Nothing disruptive was confirmed, but subtle changes in signal behavior were reportedly noted. Again, unverified, but telling. The diplomatic clock starts. While ships and aircraft maneuvered, a different response unfolded elsewhere. Quietly, messages passed through military-to-military channels. Concerns were registered. Safety of flight language was used. No accusations, no public outrage, just documentation. Because documentation is how future behavior is shaped. The Chinese response, or lack of one. Notably, there was no immediate public denial, no statement claiming equipment malfunction, no explanation. That silence suggested something important. Either the action was authorized at a local level and leadership was assessing fallout, or the incident was deemed minor and best ignored. Both possibilities carried risk. The ship adjusts course. Roughly a day later, tracking data indicated the Chinese warship altered its operating pattern. It did not retreat, but it no longer held the same course. Its movements became less predictable, more cautious. Unverified command guidance. Unverified analysis later suggested PLA Navy guidance may have been issued reminding commanders of rules regarding laser usage against aircraft. No confirmation exists, but incidents like this rarely pass without internal review. Why the US did not retaliate directly? Many viewers ask, why not shine a laser back? Why not intercept aggressively? Why not force the issue? Because retaliation normalizes behavior, and normalization is how red lines disappear. The US response preserved the red line, while increasing cost. The long game. Weeks later, the incident resurfaced, quietly, in briefings, analyses, and planning documents. It informed future flight profiles, sensor hardening priorities, rules of engagement discussions, and perhaps most importantly, it shaped expectations. The message was delivered. No missiles were fired, no ships collided, no pilots were injured, yet the message was unmistakable. Laser illumination of US aircraft will not be ignored. It will not be answered impulsively, but it will change the operating environment decisively. That is how modern power responds. This incident never made global headlines. There were no dramatic explosions, but it represents the future of military confrontation, where light replaces gunfire, sensors replace weapons, and escalation is measured not in damage, but in dominance. In the South China Sea, a single beam of light briefly crossed the cockpit of a helicopter, and in response, the entire battlespace shifted, quietly, relentlessly.